In this research documentary, I'm going to talk about institutional racism. First, I will introduce the political hype that guided new policies and laws in the 1970s. These policies and laws that were intended to help the people and the nation, as it turns out, has actually destroyed entire communities and millions of American lives. I will explain how the idea that we needed to fight a war on drugs came about and how political propaganda was able to frame for us a picture that the drug abuse is a cornerstone of all our societal evils.
America's public enemy number one in the United States is drug abuse. In order to fight and defeat this enemy, it is necessary to wage a new all-out offensive.
The U.S. war on drugs was initiated officially under President Richard Nixon to get his polls up.
I have no sympathy for the pushers and the peddlers and the others in this country. We are going to restore freedom from fear in America again.
When Nixon ran for president in 1968, he talked about the problem of crime in the streets.
The wave of crime is not going to be the wave of the future in the United States of America.
And this was really the first time in a major way that the issue of drug crime became a national political issue.
Richard Nixon is credited as the first to coin the term a war on drugs.
It's absolutely true that drugs have destroyed lives, that heroin and cocaine, for example, do nothing to engender individual dignity. But while covering the drug war as a journalist for more than a decade, I came to understand that what drugs haven't destroyed, the war against them has.
The war against drugs is heating up.
Somebody down the road said, we're going to fight a war against illicit drugs because drugs are bad. Okay, there's no argument there. But think about where we are 30 years later. You know, if you look at all the money spent on drug enforcement, on prisons, on probation officers, judges, narcotics agents, on interdiction, and everything else that has expanded due to the war on drugs, it gratifies us and makes us feel like we're tough on crime.
Put them away where they belong.
But to what end? We are the jailingest country on the planet, beyond Saudi Arabia, China, or Russia. Nobody jails their population at the rate that we do. And yet, drugs are purer than ever before. They're more available. There are younger and younger kids willing to sell them. It'd be one thing if it was draconian and it worked. But it's draconian and it doesn't work, and it just leads to more.
The thing with the war on drugs is it tries to deal with the health problem as if it was a legal problem. Addiction is an effect of human unhappiness and human suffering. When people are distressed, they want to soothe their distress. When people are in pain, they want to soothe their pain. So the real question is not why the addiction, but why the pain.
These facts are important since so much of the public opinion is grounded in misinformation. When politicians began to frame the idea that we needed to fight a war on drug abuse by jailing the drug addicts and the drug dealers, the government severely impacted entire communities of people.
Every war starts with propaganda. With the drug war, our definition of what a drug user or drug seller is, but the truth is, drugs aren't yours. You're just a minion. You're somebody without any real authority selling somebody else's dope. It's like fearing the guy who's at the drive-out window at the Burger King.
The widespread problem of locking up citizens has become the customary in our country. So how did we, as a nation, begin to stigmatize entire communities of black and brown American citizens? And the fact that racism and prejudices is very much alive in this country, hiding behind the appearance of a war on drugs. But how did the government get America to back this war?
In any war, you've got to have an enemy. And when you think about the impact, particularly on poor people of color, there are more African Americans under correctional control today in prisoner jail, on probation or parole, than were enslaved in 1850, a decade before the Civil War began. And that's something we haven't been willing to look in the mirror and ask ourselves, what's really going on?
As it turns out, nearly everyone knew all about the impact of the drug war on Black America.
There's no question that the criminal laws impact disproportionately on poor and minorities.
Certainly disproportionate number of black people are prosecuted.
In Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow, she writes, mass incarceration can be largely understood as functioning in three distinct phases: rounding up men of color, placing them under formal correctional control, and branding them as felons for life. So how do you get an entire nation of people to believe an idea that drugs are so powerful and the drug users so adept, that if they were to continue abusing or dealing drugs, our nation as we know it would cease to exist? You need to frame for them a picture and identify a group of people that are the cause of all our nation's woes. Framing is built on a series of mental images through social, talk, and cultural influences, media, that consciously and unconsciously shape what we see and how we see it.
You have to understand the war on drugs has never been about drugs.
U.S. customs officers and police are having another drive to round up dope smugglers. Here's millions of dollars worth of deadly heroin, enough, they say, to kill 6 million people.
Looking to find out more about the longer history of drugs in America? An unlikely source in Lincoln historian Richard Miller. His research put drug laws in a fascinating historical context.
Historically, anti-drug laws have always been associated with race. In the 1800s, certain kinds of drugs that are illicit today were common in this country. Cocaine was widely used, heroin. People using drugs was something that was just ordinarily accepted. Opium, for example, was used by middle-aged, successful whites, often housewives in the South. If people were addicted or abusing drugs, they were viewed sympathetically as people who had to be helped. It was seen as a public health issue rather than a crime issue. Well, one of the first changes was on the West Coast, when smoking opium was made a criminal offense. Now, why would opium smoking be illegal in California but not in Mississippi? What was going on in California that was a concern about smoking opium? Well, as it turns out, it had nothing to do with opium itself. The concern was with the people associated with smoking opium, and that was the Chinese, who had come to this country, and many of whom were in California, working hard, working for very little pay, and becoming part of the American success story. But their success was taking jobs away from white workers. So politicians got together and decided we got to find something about the Chinese for which they can be criminalized to get them out of the way. Now, of course, you can't throw people in jail simply because they're Chinese, but you can throw them in jail because they smoke opium. In the same way, we saw things going on with cocaine. Again, it was middle-aged, successful people in this country, business executives, physicians, housewives, all perfectly legal. But then around the turn of the century, cocaine began being associated with blacks. They could withstand police bullets, it was thought. They can work hard all day, all night long, and all day long again, threatening the jobs of white workers. And so laws began to be passed against cocaine. You're not arresting these people officially because they're black. You're arresting them because they've committed some sort of drug violation. Next, of course, we see the change in reputation that hemp has had. Hemp was a legitimate crop from colonial times forward, a widely appreciated commercial product. But then in the 1930s, hemp changed into something vicious and fearsome called marijuana, because at that time, marijuana smoking was being associated with Mexicans, working hard, working cheap. And once again, what was being outlawed was not being Mexican, but just some habit associated with Mexicans. These laws set up a very dangerous precedent of racial control.
We must wage what I have called total war against public enemy number one in the United States, the problem of dangerous drugs.
Nixon wins re-election in a landslide victory.
We will utilize the FBI, the DEA, the IRS, the ATF, Immigration and Naturalization Service, United States Marshals Services, and the Coast Guard. We intend to do what is necessary to end the drug menace and to eliminate this dark, evil enemy within.
When Reagan announced that he was planning to rev up the drug war, more than ever, it was political opportunity. because at the time, drug crime was actually on the decline, not on the rise.
All of us agree that the gravest domestic threat facing our nation today is drugs.
The way to take a problem and make it a huge problem is first you ask the wrong question, and then you feed us the wrong answer.
Who's responsible? Let me tell you straight out. Everyone who uses drugs, everyone who sells drugs, and everyone who looks the other way.
Next, I will look at the collateral damage that every war leaves behind. I will bring in some quotes that help continue the stigma that black men are MIA or AWOL from their responsibilities to their families, including a quote from President Obama himself.
But if we're honest with ourselves, we'll admit that too many fathers are also missing. Too many fathers are MIA. Too many fathers are AWOL. Missing from too many lives and too many homes. They've abandoned their responsibilities. They're acting like boys instead of men. And the foundations of our family have suffered because of it.
The stigma that black fathers are MIA, or AWOL, from their families continues to be repeated to us even by this nation's first black president. But has anyone asked where these missing men might be found? Today, the war on drugs has given birth to a system of mass incarceration that controls entire communities of color. Since mass incarceration has been normalized, all of the racial labels and suppositions that gave rise to the system are now embraced. This type of thinking has also allowed many people to believe that if the black men would just do the right thing, they could rise above their current social problems, have a better life, and be productive members of society. This rarely happens because once these men are caught up in the criminal justice system, it causes a stigma and stays with them for the rest of their lives.
You identify people, their characteristics, you make them other using fear-mongering as if they're the cause of our problems.
These people are killing our kids. These people are disrupting society. These people are wrecking our society.
Secondly, ostracism. Society learns to hate drug users.
If you're a casual drug user, you're an accomplice to murder.
You apply special laws to them that don't apply to others.
Now, all of a sudden, these people who've previously just been identified as drug users become criminals.
If you break the law, you no longer have a home in public housing.
The ultimate effect is isolation, being cut off from mainstream society.
So we disproportionately locked black Americans away from their families for long periods of time, and then say they have abandoned their responsibilities. Many now say that these people are the causes of all our problems in society, and we hate them. This makes it even easier to say we would be better off without them.
Harper's Magazine did an interview in 1994 with Richard Nixon's chief domestic advisor, a guy named John Ehrlichman. And this story has basically been unearthed again this week because there's a stunning moment of honesty about the real motivation behind the drug war. So remember, this is a guy who's big in Nixon's administration, one of his top guys, and he said the following about the reason behind the drug war. Quote, "You want to know what this was really all about? The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it legal. We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did."